Hi, I'm Stuart. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you've been here before, or welcome if this is your first time. In both cases, thanks for viewing my video. In this video, I'm going to give my reading wrap-up for the week of October 27th through November 2nd. I will give reviews of books that I completed. I will talk briefly about books that I read part of. I'll talk briefly about new books I got. I will show and talk a little bit about a Wobble I completed, and I will show and talk a little about a Wobble I'm working on. And I'll probably talk about some other stuff in my life too. The first book I want to talk about is Clowns vs. Spiders by Jeff Strand. I read this book as part of Fright Club, a book club created and moderated by Glyph at GlyphStarkGems and Crits at Crits_Reads. This was the October selection. The book starts around 100 years ago. There is a ship sailing on the ocean and they come upon a derelict ship. So the captain orders a few members of the crew to go onto the ship. They don't really want to. Get on the ship and there's a lot of spider webs. So one of them goes below deck, and soon there's a lot of screams and cries heard, and spiders storm out from the lower deck. I believe a couple of crew members do get back to the ship, but the spiders are able to swim across the water, and they storm the ship, and they basically kill the whole crew. I should say too, the spiders, they're about the size of a human head. The ship that the second ship that the spiders went on, which they kill all the crew, it runs aground. I think it was a couple days later, and the spiders able to get off the ship, and they find a place that is conducive to them living in. And the story goes into the future, about, I think, around 80 years. There's a group of clowns, and they're very successful. Clowns are popular. Things are going well for them. But as time passes, people become fearful of clowns. Clowns scare them. And the clowns find that they're having trouble getting work. They're really struggling. They get an offer to be clowns in a haunted Halloween attraction. They don't really want to do this because they're not scary clowns. They have actually a written code of how clowns are supposed to behave. They don't like the idea of being scared. They don't like the idea of being scary clowns. But ultimately, practicality wins over, and they go to this haunted Halloween attraction. Not too far from this haunted Halloween attraction is a cave. It turns out that this is where the spiders settled in. Due to some circumstances, they're released from the cave, and they attack the haunted Halloween attraction. The remainder of the book is the clowns trying to fend off the spiders, trying to get themselves to safety. The book has a lot of thrills, a lot of tense moments. What really made this book great for me was that the clowns, in the most dire of circumstances, would have these discussions and trying to decide whether what they were thinking of doing would be acceptable for clowns, would be acceptable per the clown code. And I just found that hilarious. It was literally laughing out loud. Not maybe when you might say LOL on a text message or something like that and you're kind of cracking a smile. I was like cracking up a lot of times. It was really funny. In addition, what I found is the funny discussions, though. There was a lot of very tense parts. There really were a lot of thrilling parts as these clowns were trying to get themselves safe from the spiders. There were some very gory deaths that were quite graphic. There were some children who were killed by the spiders. Those deaths weren't graphic, but there were still children that got killed. I recommend this book to anyone who wants a very thrilling horror novel, which is also very funny. I would say that those who would be troubled by the fact that there's a lot of graphic deaths and the death of children, it's probably not a good idea for you to read this book, or at least look at content warnings before you decide to read it. But for me, it was a really funny book. Just a great book. Really enjoyable. And also the discussion on Fright Club, which was a live by Cliff and Kritz. That was a really good discussion. I quite enjoyed taking part in it. Really, really fun discussion. I rated the book 5 stars. One of the best books I've read this year. And I think it's actually the funniest book I've ever read in my life. I don't tend to lean toward comedy, so maybe there's not that many books, but it was just a really hilarious book. Second book I want to talk about is Goth by Otsuichi. I read this book as part of the Spooky Scary Skeleton 2024 Halloween Readathon by Nicole at Nicole's Bookish Nook. I did talk about this book pretty extensively in my last video, which was my second update for that readathon. I'm kind of going to repeat, I think, a fair amount of what I said here, just in case people didn't see that video. This book is a Japanese novel translated from Japanese. There are 2 principal characters. One is unnamed, a boy. The other is Marino, a girl. They're both in the same school, and I think they're at a level of school which would be equivalent to seniors in the U.S., which would mean they'd be 17, 18 years old. Although I'm certainly not a psychiatrist or psychologist, I really think that the boy is a psychopath. He doesn't really feel emotions. He doesn't really feel anything, but he can pretend so that people think he's just a normal person, so that he can just go about his life and nobody will get in his way of things. He really enjoys things like serial killers, death, very disturbing things. Marino isn't a psychopath, but she also enjoys really dark stuff. She really likes to keep to herself. She's doesn't want to interact with other people. Because of various circumstances, she doesn't get bullied for this. She's also interested in things like serial killers, death, things of that nature. The unnamed boy and Marino become, I wouldn't exactly say friends, but kind of acquaintances, and why their relationship works is that they can be themselves with each other where they can't in other circumstances, especially the boy, because with her he can let down. He doesn't have to pretend he's something he's not. The story is initially told in the first person perspective from this unnamed boy. Although Marino is one of the 2 main characters, she never gets a POV. Her experiences are only told through the words of others. There are other characters in the book. Some, their story is told in the first person, some in the third person. It was a little harder for me at times to keep track of all the characters, especially because some of them were unnamed. The story isn't especially graphic, but you do know what happens. There are serial killers, there is people and animal mutilations, there are deaths, and although not graphic, it's still very disturbing because you know what happens. I quite enjoyed this book, but I can only recommend this to people that the issues I mentioned are not something that would, I don't want to even say the issues aren't something that would disturb them, because it probably is going to disturb any reader, but the issues aren't such that it would keep them from reading the book. But I did find it quite interesting. It's look into the minds of some very dark people, or the actions of some very dark people. I should mention too that the unnamed narrator and Marino, they discover clues about serial killers, but they have no interest in bringing bringing them to law enforcement. All they want to do is observe and try to understand the serial killers and other disturbed individuals. I rated this book 4.5 stars. And the third book I completed this week is You Like It Darker by Stephen King. This is another book I read as part of the Spooky Scary Skeleton 2024 Halloween Readathon by Nicole. I haven't read any new Stephen King books in decades. In my youth, as I've talked about in previous videos, there was a period of time he was my favorite author. I never really stopped liking him. I just tend to drift away from authors or other forms of art and find others. I did about half a dozen years ago reread Pet Sematary. I wanted to read it before the new version of the movie came out. And I've read part of Salem's Lot and part of it recently. But I hadn't read any new fiction by Stephen King. This is a collection of 12 short stories. A couple actually are more novella length. It's 500 pages, so 12 stories and 500 pages. Some of them are kind of long. Most of which are written recently. Some started a lot earlier, as you can see in the afterword if you read that. I was really impressed that King, I think he has maybe about 80 books to his credit. After such a long career, I think he's 77 now, 78. And this book I think would have been written when he was around 75. Most of the stories, or at least them, finalized. But that he can still come up with such ideas after such a long career for interesting stories. The stories have typical King trademarks. Like there's a lot of detail put in the locations. There's a lot of detail put in the characters. And I do know that there are some people that find such details excessive. They want to get to more of the heart of the story. But I quite enjoyed them because the details about the locations really gave me a sense of place, and details about the characters really made me understand them. I enjoyed every story. Of course, with a short story collection, you're not going to like everything equally, but I enjoyed every story. We'll say this, though. In my opinion, I would only consider a couple of the stories horror. Certainly, pretty much all the stories had something horrifying happen in them. Most of them had some supernatural, paranormal thing happen in them. I only consider two of them really horror stories. There was a couple of stories that, perhaps because of King's advancing age, did touch some on what it's like to be an old person, which I found interesting to read, but also kind of maybe a little disturbing because I'm getting up there myself. One of the stories had a quote which will always stick with me. A man who was in his early 70s. And his quote was, "When you hit 70, your warranties run out." And that kind of hits me because I'm not too far from 70 yet. So, my warranty is kind of perhaps pretty soon running out. But those couple of stories were interesting to me because you don't see too many stories written for those of us as we get older. And I'm fine with that. I really read a lot of stories that are written for younger people, YA books and all. And I quite enjoy them. But it is interesting to see somebody talk about what it's like to be old and the aging process and things like that. As this is a Stephen King collection, there are some rather gruesome deaths. And they are, the deaths are kind of spelled out. And I think perhaps more important that people might have a problem with is that many of these stories are set in the early COVID period. And it's not overt, but there's things like people wearing masks and being concerned about being infected and stuff like that. And I mention that because I know that a lot of people would prefer to leave those times behind. Well, actually, all of us would prefer to leave the times behind, but some people just don't want to read about it. I recommend this book for anyone who would like to read a great collection of short stories. As I said, a couple of novellas, really length, and if, like me, you hadn't seen what Stephen King had been doing in a while, this might be a good place to start because with short stories, of course, they're bite-sized. You could just read one and put the book aside and pick it up again a month from now if you wanted to. But I was really impressed. The stories are quite thrilling. I rated the book 4 stars. Now I'm just going to talk about the 5 books that I read part of. The first is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Lynn Tan. I'm actually listening to the audiobook. I borrowed it from Libby a while back and had to return it. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to return it again because I am enjoying it, but I just read so many other books, October being a Halloween month, that I just didn't get as far as I would have liked on this book. I might actually end up getting it on Libro FM. I got some credits, but I'll see how long it takes for me to get it back. But I am enjoying it. And the next 3 books are more books I read part of as the Spooky Scary Skeleton 2024 Halloween Readathon by Nicole. These are books that I didn't complete. First is The Haunted House from Hell by Mark Lestrange. This is a book that I'm thinking is good, but I have some reservations about it. I don't like one of the main characters. There's a family, a husband, wife, and 2 young girls, I think age 9 and 7. They move into this house, and I just don't like the husband that much. He's kind of passive aggressive. He's not violent or anything like that. He's not abusive. I just find him irritating. It's also a medium that, for some reason, the author decided to make her character somebody who was overweight and she had trouble controlling her intake. And I'm just not sure why for this character that was necessary. It appears maybe there's a little fat phobia there, but maybe I'm wrong. I just don't like that part of it. The haunting parts of it, though, that I am liking, so we'll see. I think I'm 56% in, so not a read that I'm disliking. It's just that I got some things that don't make it like a great read for me so far. The next book is All Hallows Eve by Christopher Golden. I'm listening to the audiobook. I haven't listened to this book too much, so I can't say too much about it, but I am enjoying the part of it I read. I think I'm 5% in, something like that, so not too far. Another book I'm not in too far is Alias Emma by Ava Glass. I'm similarly, I think, about 5% in this book, something like that. This is a spy novel, which is kind of interesting. I haven't read a spy novel in years, actually. And the final book I read part of is The Complete Tales of H.P. Lovecraft by H.P. Lovecraft. I've read the stories of H.P. Lovecraft, most of them 3 times. And I kind of wasn't going to read any more, but I just kind of had a hankering for it. So I got this version of the book. I've had previous versions of his stories, but I decided to get another copy of it. I've only read the introduction part of the first story, but this won't be something I read through quickly, but I just had a desire to read more Lovecraft. Well, read Lovecraft again. And really what I should do is read his poems. I haven't read many of them, but just had a desire to read his stories again. Halloween probably has something to do with that. Now I want to talk about 4 books I got this week. The first is The Bookshop by Evan Friss. This is the November read for Tia Chu's book club, moderated by Tia Chu. I was able to borrow this book on Hoopla. I haven't started it yet. And the next book that I got this week is The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. This is a November read for the I'm with a Band book club, moderated by MJ. This book I did borrow it from Libby, but when I went on Fable, which is where both the Tia Chu's and MJ's book clubs are, it appears that I can get it there for free. So I kind of have it both places. I kind of prefer to read it on Libby, but having it in Fable may make it easier for me to add comments if I want to add them partway through a chapter. So perhaps I'll make use of both of them. The third book I got this week is Night Parade by Ronald Malfi. This is the November book for Fright Club, the book club created and moderated by Cliff and Grits. Haven't started this book either. Those 3 book clubs, the I'm with a Band book club, moderated by MJ, Fright Club, moderated by Cliff and Crits, and Tia Chu's book club, moderated by Tia Chu. those are the 3 book clubs I'm taking part in November. The other thing too is I'm sure I will read at least one nonfiction book, and as November is Nonfiction November, that's an event created by Olive at a Book Olive. The Bookshop by Evan Friss, that book is nonfiction, so I'll be reading that book. So that's at least one book. So even though I didn't say that I was going to do that event, I'll read one nonfiction book. So I will, in effect, be taking part in Nonfiction November. And starting November 4th, I'm going to be starting the Read What You Own Challenge, an event created by MJ at Reading This Life. See how I do. Last year I tried to do, not as part of that, but on my own to read what I own and not buy new stuff, and I got about a month and a half, and I fell off the wagon badly. But hopefully I can stick to it better this year. I do have some exceptions too. I wanted to show the Wobble I completed, which is Salem the Cat, but at the moment I can't put my finger on it. I did show Salem the Cat toward the end of my last video. So if I do find it before I post this video, I'll put in a photo. But the one I'm currently working on is Steve the Frankenstein. I did have a little bit of some false starts on this, but I had to go back and start from scratch. But it's coming out pretty good now. This is like a fair portion of the body. Other than that, all the excitement about Halloween, the reading, there was something exciting that happened. I happened to look out my back window and I saw this black animal. So I looked and it was a black bear cub trotting fairly quickly across the yard. It wasn't there too long. I couldn't get a photo or video of it. I got a little concerned. I looked around, I didn't see the mother, but my sister said she thought the cub was probably chasing after the mother. And the cub did appear to be healthy. So that was kind of cool. It's only the second time I've seen a bear. A couple years ago I saw an adult. So that was pretty cool, pretty exciting. Other than that, I did some walking a couple times at the mall. Once outside. The weather here is very nice, although we could use some rain. But it's been very nice, pretty mild. Actually, Halloween was around 80 degrees here, which is kind of unusual, here being Connecticut. I would be interested in hearing how your reading week went, any books you would recommend, books you like, and anything else you may have done for Halloween. Be interested in hearing that too. If you'd like to tell me, please reply in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, please subscribe, please hit the bell to get notified when I upload future videos. I hope you have a wonderful reading week, and I hope you have a wonderful week in general.